Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sherri Chandler with Pop Culture Uncovered. I appreciate you taking the time to interview with us today and with me personally. As a former history major, this was a really fun and interesting documentary for me to get into and enjoy. So I really appreciate this.
Every time I hear that there's a history major, I'm like, oh, I'm pretty sure I got everything right, but there's like, oh.
What you got definitely right is that what I really enjoyed with this project is that it seems like whenever we get a project about racism done, they seem to tread over the exact same material over and over again. You brought a couple of different cases of lynching I had not heard about before. You really delved into how racism affects you personally in your community. So I really appreciated that. And another area that I do have interview questions, but it just dawned on me sitting here talking to you when you showed your class picture and it was just you and your brother. I have a very similar class picture where it's me and in one picture, there's 3 Black people, counting me. And in the second picture, there's 2 of us. I was raised outside of between Washington, D.C. and Baltimore.
Wow. Wow. Yes, I understand.
Yes.
I don't have the words. Well, I do have, I can say this, and just in talking about this so much, is these things come up, and this sense of what I think is powerful about the personal stuff about my family is that it is not unique. It was just common. And so there are people like you all over the country from our community who are going to be like, oh, I know about that because, what we had to do with this. And oh, I know about that because, my cousin did this over here. And yeah, my parents did stuff like that too. So, it's not unique. And, that was the kind of point of Josephine Bowling and Gwen Carr and the experiences of their families, is that you can look at them as these individual things and they're very powerful, but the real power comes from the number of times they've been repeated throughout our history.
That's true. That's true. And now that I think about it, as we're having this part of our conversation, I think the most interesting thing that's happened to me in recent years is one of my white classmates. I went to visit him while I was on vacation. And that was one of the questions he asked me was, what was your experience in school? Being that you were the only Black kid, or like one of only 2 Black kids. And I'm just like, nobody had ever asked me that before. So it was just really interesting. So my first question was, why did you decide to release the lecture as a movie compared to, I guess, continuing to lecture? I'm also an artist, so I know how it feels to be like in the crowd, personal touch, being able to talk to people directly compared to it being a movie.
Well, the lecture is 3 hours long at its shortest, and I can usually time it to like at 2 hours, 59 minutes. I'm saying thank you very much, although I do run over. And I continue to give the lecture. If I gave the lecture today, you would not recognize the first 45 minutes of it because so much has happened since 2018. In 2018, George Floyd was alive and living his life. January 6th hadn't happened. So I still give the lecture, but I was emotionally hit by this information. And as I was researching it, there were repeated blows because I would find this thing and then this thing and then this other thing and then this other thing. And so I was constantly like taking this. And when I put this lecture together, I thought, I wonder how many other people don't know this stuff, or at least don't know it in this way. And I wanted to get it out to as many people as possible. And in the 6 years that I worked at the ACLU, I shudder to guess how many thousands of miles I flew because I had my day job at the ACLU and my side gig was giving this presentation around the country. And sometimes those 2 things came together because the ACLU was completely supportive of my work and a major contributor to us getting this film made. But I can only go so many places, and a film can go a lot further. And if your goal is to get as many eyes on the film as possible, then, you know, when Sarah and Emily came to me with this idea, I just thought, oh my God, this would be fantastic.
Who do you really wish would see this, and what do you want them to get from it?
I'm sorry.
I want every person. I think I want every person in America to see this film. And, you know, I think Sarah and Emily and I are in agreement on that. So our audience is everybody, because there are people in our community that don't understand this history. There are people in every community across America that don't understand this history. And it is not the job of our community alone to go find and reckon with this history. It was stolen from all of us. And that's why, you know, I think we have been asked before about two white women working with you, Jeff. How did that work out, and why did that work out? And it's because this history is stolen from all of us. And because of the relationship that Sarah and Emily and I developed, as we started talking about the prospect of filming my presentation to get it to a wider audience. And it's one thing to say I am an anti-racist, and they certainly said that. And it's one thing to have a history of that in your family. And with the last name Kunstler, they certainly had that. It's another thing to then walk that talk. And in every aspect of the way we put this together, what was clear is this was my presentation. They wanted to help me get out my message. And once I trusted that, then our collaboration became much, much deeper, and their contributions to the final film. I'll tell you, when I first saw the rough cut of this film, the first rough cut, I lost it, because I didn't understand how these two women had taken my PowerPoint presentation, which, you know, it was good. I'm not saying it wasn't, but they made it into something different.
So Sarah and Emily, was there anything that stood out to you that you were really surprised to learn through the original lecture and during the production process? Be it in the history or in the, be it in the history or in the, my brain literally just glitched.
Or in the stories people told?
In the stories being told, thank you.
We learned, you know, tons. Sarah and I, you know, we grew up in an anti-racist household with two civil rights attorney parents. And we thought we knew a lot about racism in America. We went to progressive schools, we were well educated, but Jeff's talk, even if you know some of the details of Jeff's talk, there's something to learn in everything that in all of the areas that he covers for any audience member. And just the connections that he draws, seeing his whole talk from beginning to end, you get to today and you're like, wow, I see the world differently. I finally understand why things are the way they are and why everything we tried so far isn't working. You know, because we haven't accepted this common history, because we haven't gone back and looked at these facts and finally wrote the true creation story of this country, instead of, you know, living this lie that we've all been living. But, you know, it just, you know, one example, seeing the slave patrol badge. You know, I remember the first time I saw Jeff's presentation and that came up on the screen, and seeing how much it looks like a sheriff's badge or police ID or anything that's, you know, and then understanding that these organized, you know, policing organizations started to control enslaved people, to keep them to return them to their farms, to keep them from running away, you know, and that was the first need for a lot of these groups, was to, you know, in order to control Black enslaved Americans at that point. And then, you know, and then you see that and you're like, wow, you know, and then you think about the abuse today and the distrust today, and it makes sense in an entirely different way. And it's amazing how a symbol like that has the power to pull those two worlds together and really start to see those connections.
Oh, that's perfect. I like that answer. So I'm sorry, Sarah, did I talk over someone?
Oh no, I didn't say anything. While Emily was speaking, I was just thinking about, our founding documents, right? The Constitution, and how many Jeff taught me to look at what isn't said in these documents, how in not saying things, in not dealing with the lives of enslaved people, in not calling out slavery by name, how much those documents spoke in their silence, and how that's a silence that continues to this day. We continue to erase the legacy of slavery in this country by not talking about it, and that erasure began in our founding. It's so powerful, and it was such a powerful lesson.
I agree with that one. To what degree do you think this documentary will educate and/or change minds of those who do not believe in American racism? I wrote it that way because we definitely see people starting to deny what happened during World War II. So that's why I wrote the question this way.
I think the Who We Are Project is very concerned with that absolute question. And I left the ACLU and a job where I was working on the criminal legal system and racial justice issues on a national level, because I felt like the mission of the Who We Are Project is so critical. The way that you prevent the erasure of this history going forward is to reach as many people as possible now. Going back to 1837, John C. Calhoun was telling America, don't let these kids be taught abolition in the schools, because if we start teaching that, slavery is done for. He said it was the mind of the rising generation. And that's the exact phrase used in the Trump document, for lack of a better word, that was released on Martin Luther King's celebration day, the last day the Trump administration was in office. And it talked about returning to patriotic education to make sure that the minds of the rising generation are impacted. And it's interesting that, what Sarah just said is essentially the first anti-CRT movement was when they decided to use the term such persons instead of enslaved person in the founding document of our country. And
Yes.
So reckoning with these things will have an impact on liberals and conservatives. It will have an impact on religious and secular. Will it change everyone's mind? Of course not. But by preserving these things, by the Who We Are Project, bringing in young people from across America and training them to do exactly the same thing that I did, the same kind of research, using Sarah and Emily's talents in terms of filmmaking to help them be able to go out and not become professional historians, although maybe that's what they would do, but to take these skills to record the stories in their own neighborhoods, in their own families, that can then be part of what we will preserve at the Who We Are Project for access for all Americans to come, because you can't erase the Tulsa Massacre when you have Mother Randall on film talking about what happened. And you can't erase what lynchings actually meant when Josephine Bowling McCall tells you the story of what happened in her family. So we are going to impact education with kids, the youth, both in the classroom and outside the classroom. Don't worry about these anti-CRT laws, because kids have a thing called the internet. And there's all kinds of ways that kids can get education not in the classroom. We're going to talk to community groups, and we're talking to corporate and government leaders.
With the echo chamber that the internet can be, do you really think this, because I think on some level, my case, the people I hang around with, you're definitely speaking to the choir. Do you really think that this is going to break through? Yeah, and I'm holding back a sentence because of something that's been in my head for a while.
Well, let me say this. This kind of discussion at this level has never occurred in my lifetime.
Okay.
In 1968, when the country was up in arms and the civil rights movement was at its height, both in terms of successes and the tension, we weren't having these kind of discussions. How many times have you seen, judge me by the content of my character, not the color of my skin? But then how many times have you seen at many points that dream I had that day turned into a nightmare? That's also what King said in 1967, but you don't see that part of it. And so we have never had the kind of discussions that are going on right now in my lifetime. And even people in our community, people that you say are preaching to the choir, they and we have not been armed with this kind of history and these kind of facts. And so when you go in and make generalized statements about, well, there's this and that, it's like, no, no, no. Let me trace for you the history of policing in this country and have you understand, who do you think it was that enforced those Jim Crow laws? You think they just sat there? Somebody had to use a gun and a club to make sure people obeyed. So when even those who are in the choir, we arm ourselves with a different kind of discussion. And we are having that different kind of discussion, I believe, literally for the first time in the history of this country, in part because of technology and how wide your reach can be. So we don't know what's going to happen here because we've never been here before. And to me, that says that if you have any doubts in your mind about when it's time for you to do something, those doubts should be resolved pretty quickly.
And to make, I'm sorry.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
To bring about major change in this country, you don't have to reach everybody. You actually just have to reach a small fraction of people. It can be overwhelming and paralyzing to think, how am I going to reach this person who doesn't even accept the same facts that I accept? You're not going to reach that person in the first wave. That person needs to marinate in this for maybe, decades in order to start seeing things differently, because it's part of their foundational beliefs. But if we can, we're all, the three of us are optimists, and we do believe that people with open hearts and open minds, even if they don't share our beliefs, can be reached by, just by primary source materials, by laying this out for them, or at least if they can't be totally persuaded, it can be thought provoking for them. It can give them a moment of pause, and if there's a moment of pause, there's a way in. So we do believe that this film, because of Jeffrey's openness, because of how he welcomes people in, can have a crossover, effect and reach people beyond the choir.
Last question I have is, do you ever think we'll get to a space of racial harmony?
What I will say is this, and I actually, I am hopeful because, my dad always used to say, if you want to have an idea that things might be changing, look for stuff that hasn't happened before. And there's a whole lot of stuff in the last 5 or 6 years moving in the right direction that has never happened before. This is our last best chance, because if we roll back from where we are today in America when it comes to racial justice, what we're rolling back to is, as you can see from this film, it's horrific. And if we roll back, I have no idea how long it will take to start climbing that hill again. So tipping points don't last for a year or 2 years. They're a decade long, maybe even longer. The tipping point I described in 2018, we're in the same tipping point right now. And we have a chance this time to have it go in a different direction.
Well, thank you everyone for taking the time with me. I see we've reached the end of our 15 minutes and I really appreciate the project and I really do appreciate the film.